Hello, everybody, and welcome to Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network. You could also find me on theconsciousresistance.com and theseedsofliberty.com. So today we have Rand Eastwood, who's an anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and a liberty operative. He runs randeastwood.com, and he's a founder of a few Facebook pages, Rand Eastwood blog, Evolve, Liberty and Leviathan, as well as the Sovereigntarian. And you can find him on Twitter at Rand_Eastwood. So today we're going to be talking about a few of his articles that he wrote on his website. The most popular one was the fundamental flaw in non-anarchistic libertarian thought. And another one is anarchy equals order and government equals chaos. And another one is anarchist, the new abolitionist. So there's another one: private policing, law enforcement, and adjudication of stateless society. If we get to that would be wonderful. But I'm sure we'll have quite a bit of material with those. So Rand, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been following you on Facebook. I saw you share some of my articles occasionally, and then, I'm like, wow. And I also see you're a writer as well. I'm also a little bit of a writer, although I've been getting more into YouTubing and podcasting recently. But it's always wonderful to see fellow writers. And I try to promote, the work of other voluntarists and anarcho-capitalists as much as possible, right? So,
yep.
How do they say it? The rising tide raises all boats, right? So that's the way I see it. So maybe we'll start off a little bit with your background. I like to get the background of all my guests. Like, how did you come to anarchism and voluntarism? What was your path like, and what books inspired you? What podcasts or personalities inspired you?
All right, I can tell you exactly when I became a libertarian, and that was 1994. Actually, technically probably 1995, but Newt Gingrich, the contract with America, the Republican Revolution. You were probably about 12. So I don't know if you remember that.
95, I was 13.
Yeah. So I don't know if you cared all that much about what was going on, but
no.
I was young. I was about 30. I was young and ignorant, and I listened to Rush Limbaugh. And I hate to admit that today, but I'm not too hard on myself because there's millions of ignorant people that listen to Rush Limbaugh.
Right.
But anyway, I guess I wouldn't have called myself a conservative Republican, more of a small government, lower taxes Republican, pro-business Republican. And what Rush was saying made a lot of sense to me. And so I participated in that Republican Revolution. And that's where they swept, I don't know if you remember it all, but they swept both houses of Congress. They got some state legislatures and governorships with Newt Gingrich and the contract with America. And it was funny because the next day, it was when I lived in Indianapolis, the newspaper had like 2 or 3 inch block type big headline across there that said, "A grand old time for the GOP." And I had a picture of myself holding that newspaper up. I was so proud. Yeah, we did it. And so, I brushed my hand and leaned back and watched, and guess what happened? Nothing changed.
Utopia.
Yeah. Nothing changed. It was amazing. So that is what actually sent me looking for some. I said, it's not a 2-party system. It's a 1-party system. There must be some alternative. There must be something else. And I started looking around, and that's when I discovered the Libertarian Party. Mm. And their philosophy and principles made a lot of sense to me, and that led me to Ayn Rand and Harry Browne. And I read both of Harry Browne's libertarian books, which was Why Government Doesn't Work and How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. But really, the book that really changed me was Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal by Ayn Rand. That's like diametrically opposed to everything you've been taught in an authoritarian society, statist society. Mm-hmm. And the way I try to explain it to people, it's like I was reading this book that's telling me the sky is green. The sky is green. Trust me, the sky is green. I'm going, it is not. I really had a hard time grasping because it was so foreign what she was talking about there. But as I was reading and forcing my way through it, I was like, the sky looks kind of green. And and so that really educated me on that front. And so I basically became a libertarian, and one thing led to another. We talked the other day that I met Harry Browne during his 2000 presidential campaign as libertarian candidate in Houston. So I met him. I have a picture of that. That's one of my fond memories. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of dropped out because I went through a divorce and was struggling and wasn't paying attention to politics. But when I got back into it about 5 or 6 years ago, with social media and everything making it so much more effective, that and the Ron Paul campaign. So who's this Ron Paul guy? So I started becoming a lot more active, because before the internet and before social media, who are you going to tell? I would talk to my coworkers or whatever, but I say, yeah, whatever, but on social media and the internet, I can reach thousands of people now. I do reach thousands of people every week through all of my efforts. So it's actually got a little bit of a payoff, and everybody started talking about liberty all of a sudden. It became, in vogue, and I've been talking about it for 20 years. I'm like, hey, maybe I can teach some people some things. Well, I ended up getting taught myself, because you were saying personalities and stuff. I started watching Stefan Molyneux, Jeff Berwick. I've followed Larkin Rose. I've heard of him for quite a while, but started following him more closely, and it all started making more and more sense. Jeffrey Tucker says, "What's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist?" Oh, about 6 months. That took a little longer for me, but the logical end to libertarian thought would be a stateless society. And when I came to that conclusion myself, and I started to notice the rift online between constitutional libertarians, limited government libertarians, and anarchists or voluntarists, I really started looking at it. So why is there this disagreement between the two? And I pegged it in that article, the fundamental flaw of non-anarchistic libertarian thought is that, like for instance, Peter Schiff is a libertarian, but he'll say, and I've seen him say it several times, well, we got to have government, you have to have government. And Jesse Ventura, you got to have government. Yeah. And he talked on, Ventura was on Adam Kokesh. Well, that's another one I started watching, was Adam Kokesh. Mm-hmm. And they started debating the stateless society, or do you have to have government? And of course, Kokesh just body slammed him. Like I said, if it was a WWF match, he threw him out of the ring. It's Ventura's, and that's one of the things that Ventura did. What most people do is they say, well, how's it going to work then? How are we going to do it without a government? Like you're supposed to come up with all these answers. Right. And I actually addressed that in the private policing, law enforcement, adjudication in a stateless society. Mm-hmm. I'll get to that later. But I noticed that here's the problem, is the limited government libertarians, the constitutional libertarians, haven't accepted the reality that you can't limit government. That's the whole problem. That's the fallacy in the argument. They say, well, you got to have government for this, you got to have it for protection, for policing, for courts, these supposedly legitimate things the government does. But nobody ever stops to think, wait a minute, no matter what we've done in the history of mankind, the government has never stayed limited, because who's going to limit it? They write and interpret and enforce the laws themselves. Obviously, they're going to get out of hand. Mm-hmm. And that's what I say the American experiment was proved once and for all. And here we had some of the brightest, most intelligent men in the world got together at that time and said, how are we going to do this? And they came up with a pretty decent system, but it still didn't work because you can't limit government. So that's what I talked about in that article was the fundamental flaw is that you can't limit government. You shouldn't expect to limit government when you're giving them the monopoly on law enforcement and law interpretation and writing laws. Obviously, they're going to do what's in their best interest eventually, and it's a combination of human nature and what's called institutionalization, and that is sort of a macrocosm of human nature, and that is that people generally act in their own self-interest. So even the individuals who work in government are going to be doing what's in their best interest. And once an organization of humans, a company, a government, association, whatever, becomes institutionalized, what that means is it becomes its own reason for existence. It becomes its own priority. Because these people are vested now. They got their paycheck, they got their pensions, they got their insurance. They want to send their kids to college, and they want to, so it becomes in their best interest to promote the company's best interest or the institution's best interest, because they want the institution to carry on because they've become dependent on it. So government's no different. In the free market, when a company becomes institutionalized and it becomes the people, the workers in the company begin looking out for their own best interest, which is human nature, and the institution as a whole starts acting in its own best interest instead of the interest of the members or the customers or whoever it is that came into existence to serve, then you get this slow death spiral where they start losing their customer base because they're not, they've lost sight of the goal. You don't perpetuate yourself. You serve the customers, and that perpetuates you. But in the government's case, they don't go out of business. They don't. If they quit serving the people, they just quit serving the people. And so that is, I think, the cause behind it. But that's what I tried to identify in that article was libertarians still believe that somehow we're going to limit government, and voluntarists have realized that that's not going to happen. If it didn't happen this time around with the Constitution and everything they did to try to keep the government in check, and it's totally, it's worse than any government has ever been. It's this monster. So, so that's what that article was about. And I summed it up by saying, instead of when statists come to us and they say, well, how's this going to work? How are we going to do, without... I like to preface the whole thing by saying it's not that we won't have the services that government supplies, that the state supplies. It'll just, those services will be provided by private enterprise working in a free and open marketplace. But then, people want examples of how this is going to work, how are we going to do policing, how are we going to do all of these things. And like we're supposed to, predict 20 years down the road how that,
right.
But I think we should turn the tables. I don't think that's the right question, because as soon as they start hitting us with that, like we're supposed to have all the answers before we try anything, I think we should ask them, well, instead of me trying to speculate how everything's going to work in the future, how about you tell me how you plan to limit the government?
Right. Exactly.
We should just turn the tables and say, you want limited government? How are you going to do it? We'll write up laws. Well, we tried that many, many times. So I just think that we should quit trying to explain ourselves and make them explain themselves, because they're the ones that have 200 and some odd million citizens that have been murdered by government in the last century on their hands.
Exactly.
And, that's the best we can do. I don't think that's the best we can do.
Right.
Sorry, that's the best we can do.
Right.
And that doesn't even include wars. I mean, that's just governments killing their own citizens. It's I looked it up, and the numbers vary between like 170 million and 230 million. So I park it at 200 million. I guess that's enough.
Right.
But
sufficient.
yeah, don't want to split hairs there, but and that doesn't even include wars. That's just
right.
governments killing their own people.
Right.
And in a century, that's just one century.
Mm-hmm.
That's the what would that be? The 20th century, and that's supposed to be like the biggest century of human advancement and civilization and everything. It's in human history, and yet we have 200 million of their own citizens that the state has killed, and and evidently statists say, well, that's just the cost we pay. That's the best we can do. I don't think it's the best we can do. So
yeah, it's interesting. Like you do look at that number, 200 million, 20th century, and it sounds dismal. And then what's amazing, I just thought of it, is that in the 20th century, that's when the population has exploded, right, to what, almost 8 billion today. And it's like, despite all of that democide, right, and mass murder, to me, it shows the resiliency of the human spirit, that despite the insanity, right, and
that's a good point.
The insanity of their governments, they have outbred the murdered, brothers and sisters.
Yeah. I bet the elite really do look at us like a bunch of cockroaches. It's like, man, those guys, they just keep breeding. But
right. Yeah.
So,
and the other thing you were saying about difference between government and private enterprise is, I think it was Albert Einstein. He says, if you want to succeed, you shouldn't think about making money. You should just think about providing value to people, right? Because that's basically all it is, right? That's how you create a successful business, is you create a product that people want to give you their money for.
Right. That's the fundamental flaw. And I just learned that within the last few years. I really started studying economics and finance as part of this whole thing in the last few years, and that was a realization I just came. You think about, how can I make money? How can I make money?
Right,
how can I whatever?
Exactly.
And that's the wrong.
Yeah.
The money is how you gauge how well you're doing.
Exactly.
Serving people.
Exactly.
That's what it is. It's money is just a gauge.
Yeah.
So trying to. That's what I focus on now, is I try to be the best person I can be.
Right.
Be the change,
exactly.
and then I try to figure out, what can I do to provide value to other people. So you're exactly right.
And to me, you're right. Capitalism is about serving the customer, serving your neighbor, right? It's like you can't move forward if you don't have the customer's first priorities in mind, right? You just can't.
Right.
That's what it's about. It's about voluntary exchange. And once you lose sight of that, you will lose customers, and you will lose your profits, and you'll go under. There's just no way around it. If you want to resort to theft, then you're no longer a private business. You're a fraud.
Right. They say, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you.
Right.
It's like, you can only screw people out of their money how many times?
Right.
Until you run out. Ponzi scheme. You start running out of new people to take their money. So
and then going back to your idea of limited government being so absurd. It's like I think it was Rothbard. He said, the people who advocate for limited government, it's like give the government all the power and all the guns, and then say, limit yourself. All right. As if that's such an easy task. But like you said, they view. Right. I think the political class, they view the people as tax cattle, right? As serfs, right? That produce and produce things of value that they're parasites, right? That they just siphon off the productivity of the industrious, right? And the political class, they don't produce
Right.
anything, nothing whatsoever.
Right. Right. And then they use what they steal to buy votes from the lower
Right.
classes,
Right.
the welfare state.
Right.
But what we're seeing now is the ultimate demise of that. The parasite, the tumor, grows and grows until it kills its own host. I mean, right now they're grabbing for any money, any power they can get, because they're gonna, they're out. I mean, we're out. We can't. They're broke.
Right.
So they're just going to keep growing until they can't be supported anymore. I think that's typical evolution of the state.
Yeah.
Any parasite.
And you're also talking about your evolution towards the discovery of voluntarism in your own life, and they kind of brought to mind that voluntarism, to me, is a philosophy of humility, because in order to progress to where we are today, right, most of us went through government school. We were all indoctrinated into the statist paradigm, and we all had all these, 3 branches of government, and it's necessary, right? And it's just drilled into your head, right? Pledge of Allegiance, all this kind of stuff. And so you have to have a massive amount of humility, intellectual honesty, to examine those things that were drilled into your head, and then take them apart one by one and re-examine them, and then come to the conclusion, they really don't make sense. When you put them under the microscope of logic and reason,
right,
they fall apart.
Yeah, well, for me it was more natural. My nature. I was getting in trouble when I was a little kid. I've always been called a rebel, but I would call myself a self-thinker. But even as a little kid, I think back now, and I would get in trouble. I'd get an idea in my head, and I'd just start doing it. It didn't occur to me to ask somebody's permission or whatever.
Right.
If it was somebody, if it legitimately involved somebody, say I had to borrow a tool from you, hey, can I borrow your hammer? But, I don't ask from an irrelevant third party permission, hey, is it okay if I do? I would just start doing it. This just was my nature. So as a kid, I was getting in trouble with my parents. And I wasn't really doing anything wrong. That was what was confusing. It's just I didn't have permission to be doing it, or I wasn't doing what I was told, or I wasn't doing something the way I was told to do it. It was all this, all this irrelevant stuff. But isn't it cool? I made whatever it was. And,
that's besides the point.
And, but that haunted me, of course, in church, and then I went to public school. Man, I almost didn't survive that. That was bad. Yeah. I made like straight A's the first couple of years, and then I lost interest, and then I was just in trouble all the time. I was always reading a book or something instead of listening to the teacher.
In trouble reading a book, that's why.
yeah. So I started getting in trouble, and then in junior high, I started recognizing, I didn't know at the time what it was, but I recognized the politics of what was going on, the favoritism, that they were judging you not based on your work, because I always did great work, always got good grades, but I was always in trouble because I wasn't obeying them, I wasn't subservient, I wasn't conforming, I would do things my own way, and that isn't how we told you to do it, but isn't it cool? It's just I couldn't. So I started seeing the politics and the favoritism, the students that teachers liked, or the students that behaved themselves, were treated differently. Then I started really getting into. I started talking back. I would say anything if I started getting in trouble with the teacher, would single me out for something. I would say whatever I could to make them look like the biggest fool in front of the class that I could, and that didn't usually help my case at all. So, and then high school, the only thing that saved me in high school was art, basically. I went into music. I started playing drums. I went into photography and newspaper. And so I'm writing, I'm photography, darkroom, and music, playing drums. And so I dropped everything that I didn't need to graduate, and my days were filled up with these things I actually had a genuine interest in. And that kept me afloat until I barely graduated from high school. And then, of course, the same thing followed me into my employment. And see, this is all kind of new to me. It took me till I was probably 45 years old before I figured out what to. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was just insane or something. So then I'm going to these jobs, I'm in trouble. I do great work. I do twice the work as the other people. I have all these great numbers. The customers love me. I'm in trouble all the time because I'm not following the rules, and I didn't have, I'll fix something that's been broken for 2 weeks, causing all these so I'll fix it. I get in trouble. That's not your job. You know, what are you doing that for? Who told you could do that? I said, well, my brain told me I could do that. So, yeah. So I had the same problem in my jobs. It's all this, our whole society and culture is just saturated in this authoritarianism. You know, somebody has to be in charge of every little thing, and then you're supposed to obey all this stuff. And, you know, so you do all this great work and you're fixing things and you're increasing efficiencies in the system and you're helping everybody. And then you have a review and they say all these, oh, great scores on all this. And then they say, well, we see here that you were 1 minute late 3 times last month, so you don't get a bonus this quarter. You know, just things like that. You know, these things that are totally irrelevant in my mind. Are you serious? You know, and I don't smoke, so I don't take breaks, and then I get in trouble for skipping my breaks, and it's just crazy.
Wow.
It's like every place I work, they're so intent on just following all these rules,
Right.
and nobody cares about the work you're doing. So I never could. I had the same problem all the way through, and it wasn't until, you know, recently that, you know, when I started really looking into the philosophy and stuff behind Austrian economics and liberty and rights and voluntarism and just all these things, it all made, like, it's just natural for me. Oh yeah, that's the way it should be, you know. And then it isn't that way, and that's why, you know, I just go do my thing and think, you know, I think it's a free country. So, and it isn't. So that's, you know, once I figured that out, now since I understand what the problem is, I work around it. You know, I just circumvent, just, you know, of course I'm self-employed now, that helps a lot, but you know, so it was in my nature in the first place. And so the first time that I looked into something other than, you know, Republicans or whatever the political process is, and discovered the Libertarian Party, and that sent me, and it was just like a magnet, you know, steel to a magnet. It just, you know, this is what I've been saying for 30 years, and everybody just thinks I'm a nut or a rebel or whatever. And so,
you know, going back to your, you know, you said how you get in trouble at jobs. It kind of made me think of, you know, the businesses themselves and how much they're restricted and strangulated by government regulations.
Oh yeah,
right, and laws.
Oh, yeah.
And like you said, mandatory breaks. You're like, well, what if I don't want to take a break? No, take your break, or else I'm gonna get sued or get in trouble.
You know,
right?
Yeah, I'm working on a project,
Isn't that
and
amazing?
it's lunchtime, so I work through my lunch.
Right.
What am I I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna walk for 5 minutes to the break room. I'm gonna sit there and eat a banana. You know, I don't smoke or anything, and then wait, and then clock back in. You know, so I would, or what really would get me in trouble is after the shift. I'm in the middle of some big project. I've been working on it all day, and it's almost done. You know, so I work over for 15 minutes to, you know, finish this up or help somebody else finish something up, and I get in trouble. Okay, you can't be working over. You know, we can't pay overtime. Well, of course, that's the state's fault. Yeah. But so then the next time it happens, I'll go ahead and clock out, and then I'll finish up for 15 minutes off the clock before I go home, and I get in trouble for that. You can't be working off the clock. You know, it's like you can't win. Right. It's like they want you to do anything but work. You know,
right.
And so you look at it, you know, like you said, all the government mandate and regulation, but then you've got placation of employees, which has just gotten completely out of hand. I mean, you know, you look at somebody sideways, they sue you. You know, what is this wrongful termination? It's like, you know, the guy cutting my grass sucks, so I fired him. That's wrongful termination. You could fire him for any you know, it's not a contract.
Yeah.
So you got and that's what you're seeing in customer service now. If you think about it, a business today in this country, its first priority is to satisfy all the government mandates and regulations and licenses, fees, and make sure you're keeping so they don't shut you down.
Right.
And then you've got employee placation. You got to coddle everybody, make sure you don't get sued, pay, with the minimum wage and all that debate, pay above market rate, all these paid for benefits, paid time off, all this stuff you got to do for the employees so you don't get sued. And then somewhere in there, they got to squeeze out a profit so they could stay in business.
Yeah.
So like fourth or fifth on the list is customer service. Right. I mean, the customer is going to fall all the way down there now because that's just where it's going to be on the totem pole. So, and when you have a minimum wage wiping out half the workforce, instead of having, 10 workers at $5 an hour, they've got 6 workers at $8 an hour. So you go in any place now that's retail and everybody's running around, there's hardly anybody working there and all that. So, I think that's why, for the most part, customer service has gone out the window because companies are, they got to take care of the government and they got to take care of their employees first. So,
yeah, I think one way to, I describe government in general is being one giant broken window fallacy, because just I mean from the individual point of view, just taxes taken out of everything you do and your income tax and all that, and then from the business point of view, from the entrepreneur, the most expensive thing that he has to take care of first is taxes, and also diverting capital towards these thieving bureaucrats, and then diverting his energy and effort towards complying with all these regulations.
Right.
and that's diminishing your ability to create your product or service, right?
Right. And all those costs get passed along.
Right.
And that's one of the things, I'm glad you bring that up, because that's one of the things that I try to do in my writing, because I'm not an economist, I'm not a constitutional scholar, I'm not a historian. I talk and write about things that make sense to me. And maybe that's why a lot of people really enjoy my writing, is because it's very simple to read. I make real simple points.
Right. Yeah.
But one of the things I like to try to do is to point out the costs. I like to run the numbers and point out the costs of things, because it's all hidden. People don't understand what this, not only on a, from a liberty and a social aspect, but financially, what it really is costing you to have this. One article I wrote on my blog, back when the FDA was threatening to shut down, I don't know if you heard about it, they were threatening to shut down the artisan cheesemakers.
Really?
They for thousands of years, cheesemakers have aged cheese on these wooden...
Those evil cheesemakers.
Yeah. Like they got, well, what are we going to find to pick on now? Cheese!
That's what the problem with the world is today, is cheesemakers.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Well, you know what it is it turns into a control thing, just like everything else. They go, you got to do it our way.
Right.
Nobody's thinking about it. It's just... Number one, it's a power thing, but number two is how can we make more money? They're going to find these people.
Yeah.
Well, artisan cheesemakers for eons have used wooden planks to age their cheese on.
Right.
The FDA's coming, that's not sanitary. There's no way you can sanitize a wooden plank. So they're like telling them they're threatening to ban them, so you can't use wooden planks. And the cheesemaker's like, well, we can't make cheese.
Yeah.
That's how you make cheese. And so I think they did end up backing off. It got online and everybody was... But I wrote an article that's called, it's on my blog, it's called FDA Cut the Budget, Not the Cheese.
Right.
And the reason I bring that up is because I did some research on the FDA and the USDA. Okay, now here's two unconstitutional government bodies. What is their main, they have a lot of duties, but what is their main... Their prime objective is to make sure our food is safe and healthy, right?
Right.
The Food Drug Administration and the USDA. So they're supposed to inspect the food. They're supposed to make sure, that they're not poisoning us. Well, take a guess. What do you think their budget is? Annual budget. You won't believe it.
The FDA?
I looked it up for both of them combined.
I have
The
no
FDA,
no
I think the FDA ranks up there with the TSA. I think it was like 8 billion.
Oh yeah.
Billion with a B. And the USDA was 100 and something billion. But the two together was $136 billion a year.
Uh-huh.
Now, I like to break that down because billions and trillions don't mean anything to anybody.
Right.
That's $136,000 million.
Right.
We could hand $1 million to 136,000 entrepreneurs and think of what that would do to the.
Right.
We'd instantly have 136,000 more millionaires investing in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they are charged with keeping the food safe.
Mm-hmm.
And our
safe.
food isn't safe. That's the thing. That's the thing that kills me. It's making us fat. It's making us sick. It's killing us. It's full of toxins. It's full of poison.
Right.
That's the only thing they're supposed to be. So every year we're handing them $136 billion to not do their jobs. And, and I don't think people realize. It's like, what could we do if every year we could hand out $136,000 million to people that are actually going to do something with it? I said the same thing in that podcast I was on, Unfiltered Liberty. I talked about the TSA. Mm-hmm. I haven't written this article yet, but I want to. It's an open letter to the federal government. Hire me. Okay. and here's the thing: as I was looking at the TSA, they've been around for how long now?
Since 14 years, 2001, right?
13 years, 14 years, something like that. They have a $8 billion a year budget.
Whew,
okay.
Nice.
So we're talking about over $100 billion we've spent so that they can catch how many terrorists? I think it was zero. So I was going to write a letter that says, hire me because I'll not catch any terrorists for way less than $100 billion.
Exactly.
I'll take a cool 100 million and I'll leave the country and I'll be sure not to catch any terrorists.
Exactly.
So we just stole all this money and nobody looks at it. And that's what I try to point out.
Right.
But back to your point is on more of even a local level, doctors. You ever notice, like most doctors' offices, you go in, you sit in a room, and the doctor's running around to each room. He spends 5 minutes with you,
Mm-hmm.
The last stat that I read said that the doctor has to hire 5 administrators. An office has to have 5 administrators for every one doctor to handle the government, the regulations and the mandates and the paperwork and all that crap.
Right.
So he has to hire 5 people just to keep the government off his back while he's running around, and he can't spend any time, And even deeper, one thing that people don't think even further is the other reason, government regulation skyrocketed our health care to where nobody can afford it. So now we're using insurance for every little thing instead of just catastrophic. And now it's to the place insurance not even affordable. Well, that's because, the government's regulating it to the point that, there's no innovation, there's all this bureaucracy, and the costs keep just going up and the options keep coming down. Uh-huh. And the other thing you have to think about, you have to factor in that, the doctor has to recoup all those, what I call artificial costs that the government's pumping into the business. That's he has to charge you and me to pay for all his people to keep the government in check. But the other thing is, a lot of people don't think about, is medical school. He also has to recoup.
Yeah, student loan debt.
Yeah, exactly. And why is why is the cost of the education so high?
Right.
Because the government got involved and skyrocketed the cost of education.
Right.
And so, that's even deeper into the thing that he's paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to get his education to begin with.
Right.
And that has to go, he has to recoup that into his fees. So now, none of us can afford to go to the doctor. So, but those are the kinds of things I like to point out and actually have numbers and say, you realize what this is costing,
Right.
you know, and because people they don't see it. It's invisible, they
Right.
think.
Yeah, the going back to your the FDA and food. I saw a meme where you see the ingredients list. Enormous amount of ingredients, right? All complex chemical names, and
Oh, yeah.
very long, and preservatives. Artificial flavors, artificial colors. It says, without the government, who would keep the food safe for us to eat?
Well, thank you, because that was my meme.
Oh, was that
I
yours?
created that.
Was
yeah.
that yours? That was awesome.
Yeah, that was.
I remember that.
Before I started Evolve, which is really more strictly stateless society,
Right.
but all that kind of stuff was on my Sovereigntarian page.
Excellent.
And I was making these memes without government. There'd be riots in the street. I have a picture of all these police officers beating people in the street. There's a riot in the street, but it's because of the government.
Right.
And then, here recently when the EPA poisoned that river, I think it was in Utah. Did you see that? The EPA dumped.
I heard about that.
Just destroyed that river. I can't remember.
Right.
Yeah, I got an aerial photograph of that river and said, without government, who would protect the rivers? It went viral, man. It was shared all over the place. But yeah, that's what I did. I went and I found, a Google image. I found a label that had all that chemicals and colorings and all that. You can't even pronounce the words.
Nope.
Of who would keep the food safe.
Right.
And that was the point of my article, Cut the Budget, Not the Cheese, is like, I don't know about you, but when I have a job to do and I'm not doing it, then usually I get fired. But,
exactly.
They'll come to me and say, you really need to be doing your job. They're not going to continue to hand me $136 billion every year and say, oh, well, people are dying, but, whatever.
Yeah, not only would you continue working, you get a bonus, you get a raise. So
you're
working for the government, but
you get a raise, full pension,
right?
Free benefits for your whole family, and then the way that works, I don't remember where I was reading it, but it was talking about bureaucracy. Bureaucrats don't want to do any work,
right?
So the first thing they do is they hire people under them to do their work for them. Well, those people are bureaucrats too, right. So they hire people under them. That's why the budget always has to get bigger and bigger.
Right.
And then you just have this huge, you have the guy at the top giving an order, and then they give it to them, and they give it to them, and the order just goes down, and it's just nobody ever does anything.
Exactly.
So,
talking about, how companies have to comply with all these regulations and how, that destroys their just diverse resources. I was listening to the Tom Woods show today, and I heard about the Volkswagen scandal. Have you heard about this?
Yes.
I just heard about this for the first time today. I couldn't believe it. And it's like the Volkswagen manufacturers, they programmed their computers so that the emissions would pass.
They cheated. Basically.
They would pass the test, to get their certification, I guess, or inspection or something for safety, and then once they go back to the customer, the computer changes back to be more efficient.
So I mean, it's even better than that. I'm trying to look it up now. They were working around these ridiculous. There's a couple of points I need to make. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I was going to find it. Since then they've discovered there's like 5 other car manufacturers that were doing the same thing. Now everybody's in trouble. It's anyway. Number one, if the car manufacturers have been cheating on the emission exams for all these years, on emission tests, emissions, to get around the ridiculous government mandates, and nobody noticed, then why do we have the mandates? That's the thing. It's like, it wasn't, nobody's going, man, what's with all this smog, It's like, it's like they only got away with it because they found out about it, not because it was causing any problem.
Yeah.
But so, it's like, what are you guys doing? So they were getting around. Look at Ford. You want to talk about government mandate? They stopped selling, talk about an icon of America, the Ford Ranger. They can't sell it in the United States anymore, because the government mandates made it where they couldn't do it profitably. So if you want a Ford Ranger, you got to go to Europe or someplace where they're allowed to sell their cars, and it's it's crazy. It's just absolutely insane. So
Yeah, yeah, it's really amazing how people really do think that if it wasn't for inspectors. Actually, you know what? I have a friend who has a food truck, and so he's an entrepreneur. He's got a few people working for him, and he's a chef. But I love talking to him because he really he lets me know how annoying it is, to go and sell his food. He needs permit for this, permit for that. Inspectors come, and so
yeah.
he used to do farmers markets, but now he just has avoided farmers markets because all the permits required. It's so annoying. So he does mostly private events, private dinners, corporate events, and he finds that so much better because
You mean it's like catering? Is that what you mean?
Well, he's
or like a
travels
street vendor. What do you?
Yeah, I guess like a street vendor. He's got a food truck. He travels around.
I was going to say he's lucky he can even do that because that's like illegal in a lot of places.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Or it's real restricted, like the taxi.
Right.
They only allowed so many.
Yeah,
there might be too many street vendors out there.
Oh yeah, I mean taxi is completely government pseudo monopoly, but yeah, the street vendors they are very. Yeah. A lot of people don't like them, especially the restaurants, right? They, like one restaurant would say, you can't sell, within a radius of this, this much around my restaurant, and so they go outside of that radius, and then they're fine until if another restaurant opens up, they're like, well, you can't sell around my restaurant, so they get kicked around, and it's really sad, and people. People really they don't see how if there's more variety, right, more vendors, that's even better. That's gonna
you'll reach an equilibrium between the market demand and the supply. You're not going to get saturated because then the profits go down to where people quit entering the business.
Right.
That's what they say about taxis. Oh, if we didn't have a limit, there'd be way too many taxis.
Right.
No, there would be just enough taxis to fulfill the demand, and the price would be down, the service would be up.
Yeah.
But about restaurants, I want to talk about that. One of the things I like to say that gets people interested is I say, well, when you look at how our economy is just in the toilet, it's just crashing. And what I like to say is as long as it's illegal to start or own or operate a business in this country, I imagine the economy is going to be in pretty bad shape. What do you mean it's illegal to start? Well, yeah, it's, and this is the way I think. It is illegal to start, own, and operate a business in this country. And let me give you an example. Say we've got this guy named Joe. For a hobby, he cooks. Several years go by, he gets really good. He's got, 24 recipes. His friends love it. His family loves it. He's got really good. And he says, hey, you know where I'm going with this. I want to open a restaurant. I got, So, what's he do? He installs a commercial size oven in his garage, and he clears out the living room and puts up a bunch of tables and chairs and throws a sign out front that says Joe's Diner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you think's going to happen? The government's going to come and shut him down because it's illegal, So just because you can do it if you pay off the government first, it still means to start, own, and operate a business is illegal unless you pay the fines. You have to pay all the fines up front.
Right.
And, but if you do it without that, if you just start a business, they shut you down. It's illegal to do that. And then the other thing is zoning. You're talking about restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
They zone and they say, well, if you're going to start a restaurant or retail or whatever restaurant, it's got to be in this area that's zoned specifically for restaurants. Well, what does that do to the supply? I mean, the supply of land where you can open a restaurant goes way down, so the cost goes way up. Mm-hmm. That's why you and I can't just go out and start a restaurant because it costs, $500,000 probably minimal. And you got to get an investor or you got to get a franchise or something that covers all that up front. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so right up front, you've drastically reduced the supply of property that you can put a restaurant on, which sends the cost through the roof. Mm-hmm. And who pays for that? That all goes right into the cost of the product. Either the cost of their monthly cost to rent the property if they're renting or whatever, or, they got to recoup the $1 million they spent because they had to put it in that spot. They Joe couldn't just open his diner in his house or something. So even the zoning costs people a tremendous amount of money, and just not aware of it. So,
yeah, and I go to this farmers market near me, and it's funny. Like last year, I went there, and they didn't have any hot food, like prepared food at all. And then this year, they started having prepared food, and then I was asking questions. I was asking, "Oh, wow, that's interesting. Why didn't you guys have it last year?" And then the guy told me, "Well, the Chamber of Commerce said that if we were to have hot food, that would steal customers from the businesses in the town." And so it would negatively affect them. And so in order to protect those businesses and their customers and their profits, they prevented people from bringing hot food. Isn't it amazing? And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so if a person wants to go to a sit-down restaurant, right, have a appetizer, entree, and dessert, right, in nice comfort, right, on a nice chair, and they are outcompeted by a guy in a farmer's market with a falafel. What does that say about the value of your food in your sit-down restaurant?
Besides the economic fallacy, well, we have to protect their profit,
right?
But you're taking profits away from me, so it's an equal. It's an equilibrium kind of thing. Taking the sales away from me and giving it to him isn't protecting anybody.
Right.
It's all, the profit is all staying in the community. It's just, but it's protectionism. It is. Those industries go in and pay for campaigns and stuff and get these people elected, and then it's like, well, like taxi and Uber. I'm always ranting and raving about the taxi industry and Uber, and because they just now here allowed Uber to come in. They actually banned it. It went to court, and the judge upheld it because Vegas, it's huge taxi and limo industry here, and they own the politicians.
Oh.
And so they didn't allow. They were actually pulling over Uber drivers, arresting them and fining them and confiscating their cars.
What? Oh,
it's like,
God,
the way I put it was like, okay, let's say I'm looking for a TV set. I go on Craigslist,
right.
or maybe a Craigslist app on my phone, and you're selling a TV for $100.
Yeah. So
I said, okay, let's hook up. So we meet somewhere, and I give you $100 and you give me a TV set, and then the police break in the door and they arrest you and confiscate the TV because you don't have a license to be selling TVs.
You're not charging sales tax.
Yeah, well, yeah. And if I want to buy a TV, I have to go to a dealer and pay full price at a retail location. It's just because Uber isn't a taxi service. It's an app. It's peer-to-peer. You say, hey, anybody got a ride? In fact, I experienced something similar. I hired a guy on Craigslist that had a pickup truck. I needed to move something. I got on Craigslist and found this guy that had a pickup truck, and I called him, and he came over, and he said, well, what I do is I put the ad out for just like a day or two, and then I pull it down because they're cracking down. And I'm like, cracking down? Cracking down on what? It's illegal here to hire yourself out and your truck to do any kind of hauling or commercial anything with your pickup truck if you don't have the right permits and licenses and stuff. I said, you got to be kidding me. It's just, and they did the same thing. They, what is it? Airbnb, some of those rental places.
Right.
Okay. Those are places, short-term rentals. You can get a room or whatever when you're just traveling. Well, Vegas has this huge hotel industry.
Yeah.
And that peer-to-peer rental was hurting the hotel industry because people are coming in and they're staying for a weekend at somebody's house and going on the strip. They're not paying these outrageous hotel fees, right?
Right.
So they didn't outright ban it. They regulated it out of business. I mean, you got to keep it under the table. But what they did was they passed a law saying you can't, in your own house, your own property, you can't rent a room to somebody for less than 30 days. Now,
wow.
Yeah.
Really?
So like, if people are complying actually, then they're not going to be able to get these weekend travelers and stuff to come in for one weekend unless, there's probably ways technically to get around it, but it's the same kind of thing. It's like, who are you representing here? People can save a lot of money. The people that live here can make a little extra money. And my brother and I operate a pool service company, and a lot of the properties we have are rental properties. And that's how I found out about that, is because they used to be leased all the time. We'd go in there to do the pool. There's new people there every week or maybe 2 weeks. All of a sudden, they're all vacant. And then I was talking to one of the managers one time. He said, yeah, they outlawed it. You can't, it's illegal to. So now they're talking about selling their property. They can't rent it anymore because it's illegal to rent it for less than 30 days. So, you got to go get a hotel room and pay outrageous fees.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's really it's really amazing. The number of laws, and it's constantly increasing, right? Number of laws, number of regulations, and nobody knows the full extent. They say ignorance of the law is no excuse. Who knows all the laws? Have you seen the Federal Registry? The politicians don't even know what they write, right? So everybody's breaking the law. Basically, everybody's a criminal. So basically, in that society, if they want to target anybody, if they follow you long enough, they will find something that's some obscure law that you have broken.
Yeah, I am seeing a lot of things online about that, with the NSA and everything, that they're watching literally everything you do. Right. And it's not so much that they care what you're doing, but when you start getting under their skin, you start causing problems, and they're going to go back through and find something. They'll find something to charge you with, to get you out of their hair. And that's something to think about, You when you're doing the kind of stuff we do, if it starts getting real popular, then all they have to do is look at your online activity and find something. What do they say? We commit 3 felonies a day or something without even knowing it. They pass laws without even reading them. They say, well, I got 800 pages that came on my desk 3 hours before we voted on it. Now, I have a solution for that. Rand Paul, he drives me nuts. The read the Bill Act, where they have to read. It's like that's like the constitutional amendment to follow the Constitution. It's just right. Do you hear what you're saying? Okay, so we're going to have a constitutional amendment that says they have to follow the Constitution. But anyway, if I was a representative, and I was actually upholding my oath to the Constitution and representing my constituency within those parameters, and a big bill hit my desk a day before we're going to vote on it that's 1,000 pages, you know what I would tell people? I don't have to read it to know that it's unconstitutional. I'm voting no. If it has anything to do with education or healthcare or drug laws or any of these things that are unconstitutional to begin with, right. I don't have to read it. It's unconstitutional. We don't have. So that would be my solution if I was in. But
yeah. I mean, we just have to. I mean, I think that's our job is telling people that anarchy is not about a lack of rules. It's just a lack of rulers, right? Because there are always unwritten social rules in civil society that people respect, right? I tell people we are surrounded by anarchy, right? The dating world is anarchy, right? There's what time you wake up, what time you go to sleep, the clothes you wear, the profession you choose, the people you want to date. That's all anarchy. Nobody forced you to do that. No government official. So
you're going to make me do this. I wrote an article, a quick little article about that exact thing, and I want to read it to you. It's like one paragraph, so don't worry. Okay. It's called A Day Without Anarchy.
Nice.
And it's exactly what you're saying there. I get these ideas.
They have to realize that, like a lemonade stand, that's anarchy. Craigslist,
well, yeah,
trading, that's anarchy, right?
I was publishing those memes. I have a meme that shows a girl working a lemonade stand, and then there's all these kids that are lined up following the rules to get lemonade. I said, this is anarchy. I showed a poker tournament, everybody's playing cards. This is anarchy. Yeah. There's rules. Everybody's voluntarily following the rules.
Right.
Here's that article. Because somebody had said something in something I was watching or something I read about how, I think it was Butler Schaefer, and said, we live, just what you were saying, we live our life, as anarchists every day. I mean, we don't vote on everything. So here's what I said: a day without anarchy. You might enjoy this. This morning, my brother showed up at my place, put a gun to my head, and forced me to go to work with him all day. At the end of the day, I put a gun to his head and forced him to pay me. After work, I stopped at the grocery store, put a gun to the cashier's head, and forced her to sell me the groceries I needed. I then went to a local electronics superstore where a couple of thugs from Apple put a gun to my head and forced me to buy an iMac. But at the register, I put a gun to the cashier's head and forced him to also sell me a remote keyboard and trackball. On the way home, I was sitting at a traffic light when a homeless man approached my car, put a gun to my head, and forced me to give him a couple of dollars. Arriving home, my neighbor came over, put a gun to my head, and forced me to come over to her driveway and help her change a flat tire on her car. See, this is exactly how society operates on a daily basis. Every interaction between people must be forced at gunpoint or at a minimum under threat of violence. Otherwise, nobody would be willing to help each other or cooperate, and nothing would ever get done. This is why anarchists who believe that all human interaction should be voluntary, uncoerced, and free of violence or the threat of violence are simply crazy. So anyway, so yeah,
nice.
you want to make a point, when anarchists, right? We do the right thing generally without somebody having to put a gun to our head. The only time somebody has to put a gun to our head is usually when it's the government making us do something,
right?
Paying our taxes or, making us get a smog check or whatever it is.
Oh yeah.
But you put a gun. You sent somebody to my door and said, "You're going to be on this podcast." Okay.
Exactly. That's the only reason you came on.
Yeah. I'm just abject fear for my life was all that it was.
Right.
I was really afraid. About the Seeds of Liberty. I was afraid totally afraid of going, because there's 3 of you there, and you guys could just gang up on me and just beat the crap out of me if I don't come on that show. But
exactly.
So yeah, on a day-to-day basis, we cooperate, we do the right thing. There's no violence until the state gets involved in one way or the other, and then everybody's having to force each other to do stuff.
Right.
But
how many people when they're in the street, they say, "Oh, look, the police! Yay! Thank goodness the police are here!" Everyone's like, "Run! The police!"
Yeah, you see a cop behind you while you're driving. It's like, oh my God, am I going to get killed because I don't have a license plate light?
Right.
Whatever it is. And what they pull that one girl over for? A tail light was out, or a license plate light, or something. The black woman who ended up hanging herself or something. She died in prison. She was a liberty activist. I can't remember her name now.
I heard that. Yeah.
And there's dash cam footage where the guy is ordering her to do all these things that they're unlawful orders, aren't things that he has any business. And when he told her to put her cigarette out, it was like in the ashtray of her car. She's in her car, the cigarette in the ashtray. He's outside, and he wants her to put her cigarette out. She said, that's not illegal. I don't need to put my. And that's when he lost it and dragged her out and arrested her, and then she ended up dying. So it's like it could be any little thing these days. They'll just kill you.
Right.
It's just crazy.
Right.
But
I don't want to keep you too long, but before we go, please, can you plug your websites once again and see if they want to contact you or follow your work? How can they reach you?
Okay. Well, I do most of my in-depth writing is on my blog, which is randeastwood.com. And then I do a lot of microblogging on Facebook. I'm always open to friend invitations or friend requests on Facebook on just my profile, Rand Eastwood. I also have a corresponding blog page, it's Rand Eastwood Blog. And because my blog, I don't just blog about liberty, I blog about a lot of things, philosophy and spirituality and psychology and science and technology. I blog about everything I'm interested in. Liberties and anarchy is a big part of it, but it's not dedicated to that. So if they're just interested in the liberty stuff, you can go to my Facebook page is Rand Eastwood blog, and then I have the Sovereigntarian, which you mentioned, which really talks about, well, the slogan is defending and empowering the sovereign individual. So it really focuses more on the power of the individual, the rights of the individual. I have Liberty and Leviathan, which the slogan is exposing the true nature of the state and its impact on liberty and society and the economy. And that's really more, I post a lot of news and commentary to demonstrate basically the failure and the damage of the state, what the state really is all about, the true nature of the state. And then my latest one, Evolve, which is dedicated to hopefully helping the human race evolve to a stateless society, a voluntarist society, which I think is the next step.
Excellent.
So I actually hold the opinion, some of the things I've written, I actually hold the opinion that it not only makes sense, but I think it's going to be necessary for our survival. That's the next step. Aside from global government and slavery, I think eliminating the state is going to be necessary for the survival of humanity, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's the mental illness of statism. Something I like to ask of my guests is, if you were to meet someone who's like on the fence about, anarchy or voluntarism, and is critical of the government, and what would you tell them to completely abolish their belief in statism?
Wow.
Or even someone, let's say you met on the street, and you just have a short time to talk. What would you say, like a short soundbite to convey the quickest truth to them?
I've never actually considered a question like that before. What would I say? I run into somebody and I have one sentence to say to try to convert somebody,
or a few sentences.
I don't know exactly what I would say, but I would probably, the best thing to do is to ask questions and let them come to their own, So I would ask them, so you think it's, that violence is okay to use violence against innocent people? Well, no, you don't think that if you take money away from people that's theft? Well, yeah, of course that's theft, So one thing, when people say paying taxes is voluntary, one thing I do like to say is, okay, if you think it's or it's not theft, they say paying tax, I say it's theft. Oh, it's not theft. Okay, let's make taxes voluntary and watch what happens. Well, am I going to send thousands of dollars? It would just drop like that, So if it's obviously not voluntary, because if they have an option. So I don't know. I think, I have a problem with taxes being theft, and I have a problem with using violence and force to, force people to do or not do whatever it is. And so I suppose I would just, I would ask them the question, so you think it's okay to put a gun to somebody's head and make them do what you want them to do? Or, something like that. And they would have probably a hard time justifying that when you really look at it. And people say, well, that doesn't happen. I actually got a guy tell me that, I'm against mandatory GMO labeling because I think it's a violation of the rights of the business owners.
Yeah, it is.
And
it is.
And I was big, long debate with this guy, and he actually said I was crazy. I said, all I can figure is you're crazy, because nobody's going to go into their office and point guns at them and make them do it. And I'm like, that's exactly what they're going to do. If they mandated GMO labeling and a company didn't do it, and they didn't do it, eventually men with guns are going to show up and they're going to arrest everybody and shut the business down. So he's like, nobody's going to stick a gun to their head and for some reason
the government doesn't have guns.
Yeah, they can't make that leap. That the only reason that any of that happens is because they're pointing a gun at you. Yep. Are you gonna pay a traffic ticket if you don't have to? You don't pay it. Eventually, somebody with a gun shows up at your house and takes you away, and I guess I better pay that. So yeah, it's the whole.
Yeah.
using violence on people and taking their money and property.
Yeah, simply put, a law is an opinion with a gun. Nice. It's one of my favorite stuff. I'm on you.
Yeah, before we go, I did want to touch on one other thing. I think this is important because it has to do with the future of a stateless society. And when you're debating with people, and they say, "Well, how's this going to, who's going to build the roads, whatever it is? How's this going to work? How's that going to do? How are we going to have courts? How are we going to have law enforcement?" And the argument I like to use there, at one point in time, nobody understood how manned flight was going to work. And private enterprise brought it about, and it constantly gets improved throughout the ages. But like, there could be a couple hundred of us in a room, and you could say, okay, who here knows how to design and build a 55-inch flat screen TV? Well, nobody knows how to do that. But what? We have millions of them around the world.
Right.
So then I go off on the examples: the computers, the TVs, the satellites, the spaceships, the cruise liners, the internet, all of it. And nobody knew how that was going to work until they started working on it and trying it. Usually the private sector, and they brought it about. So if you're going to argue that stateless society, we're not going to try a stateless society because we don't know right now how all these things are going to work in the future, I think that's an invalid argument. That's what I call it.
Of course it is.
It's an invalid argument, and if anything, the state slows down the progress of anything that we do come up with. Once it's regulated, it stifles innovation, and it throws the cost through the roof. And everybody has to, once it's regulated, everybody has to do it the government way. So how can you innovate? That's why the healthcare and medication and everything has just come to a grinding halt. So that's what I like to say to people. Just because we don't know how private enterprise is going to bring these, somebody brings up, somebody starts a private police force, which they were doing like in Detroit. My article, Private Policing and Adjudication of Stateless Society, has a whole list of links to examples of private policing and things. And, somebody starts a private police force, and, it operates for a while. They see what's good, what's bad. They start improving it. They get recommendation. They have problems. They fix it. Somebody else says, hey, I can do it better. They come up with it, So it's not like, okay, today we're going to decide how it's going to work 20 years from, because it's always going to change. If it was voluntary, if it was in a free market, it's always going to change and improve to the marketplace.
Right.
So, just not understanding how it worked today is no reason to not try it. Basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, just to show, my interpretation of that argument is the slave master asking the abolitionist, tell me how the cotton will be picked without slavery. Right? And I tell people that the abolitionists were not fortune tellers or oracles. They could not foresee the rise of the industrial machines that would harvest the crops, right? But they just opposed chain slavery on moral grounds alone, right? That you cannot own another human being, right? And and that's basically what voluntarists and anarchists are today.
And it was the advancements under capitalism that pretty much ended slavery everywhere else. Right. It just became more economical to use machines than to use human labor.
Exactly. So, yes, exactly. Wonderful conversation, Rand. Thank you very much.
All right.
So this is so if anybody wants to donate to my show, you can donate Bitcoin, PayPal, or Patreon. We have the links below. Please support me, because this is a labor of love. I love doing it. I want to continue to do it. And funds are very encouraging. Right? It's I didn't start this to make money, but it would be very encouraging to do so, and it would I'd be most grateful, and it would help me find all the these wonderful guests like Rand, and continue doing it. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot, Rand.
All right, thank you.
Yes, this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network, and theseedsofliberty.com and theconsciousresistance.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.